Okay, wonderful. So now we have our solo podcaster, our interview style podcasters. Let's think about a roundtable situation, because first thing that comes to my mind is maybe everyone wants to yappa, and then how do we control things? Someone give me some thoughts. I'm panicking.
So I think that is the very real, I think, big concern with roundtable, like panel discussion style podcasts, and once you're expanding beyond like 3-4 people, is, does everyone really get the opportunity to add value? How long does the conversation have to be for everyone to really be able to get, like, if you got 3 or 4 people and they all just give 15 or 20 minutes of like value, that's an hour or more already, like without any of the other stuff, the intros, etc., etc. So I think having a very, very good host or facilitator is really important there. I think the guests being conscious of the fact that everyone needs to get an edge and a word in edgeways is really important. But I think, going to that kind of diversity of perspectives point, as opposed to a one-on-one interview or maybe a 2-on-1, and I think particularly for, you mentioned like contentious issues and things that are relevant, it really allows you to maximize what I think podcasts are great for, which is like facilitating debate and conversation and really showing all of those different elements and getting into the nuance on all of these things, and having that happen in real time, as opposed to, maybe over a season where you have different guests with different perspectives. I think it opens up the opportunity for a really rich dialogue.
I think it's very important to have people. If you're having that round table, I think it's important to have people that have different perspectives or have different,
like areas of knowledge,
like the expertise. They have different expertise.
Yes.
So everyone can learn.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, because like I feel like the worst thing possible would just be like a confirmation bias round table where they're all just gassing up each other's opinion. This made me think of a panel discussion that we facilitated during, I think, African Climate Week, and it was really interesting there to see how all the panelists were working in different sections of environmental activism, and it brought together a really well-rounded conversation. So there's definitely value, and I think, like we've discussed with each one, pros and cons.
I think the last thing just to touch on with the like panel discussions and roundtables, I think guest selection in and of itself, they're beyond like topical knowledge or their area of expertise or interest, whatever. What's really important is also finding people that are going to be good conversationalists in that frame. I don't think you can throw anyone onto a panel discussion style conversation, because you've got to be a practiced conversationalist to some degree. And I think that's an important thing to consider.
Yeah, for sure. It's not easy to be on a recorded conversation at all. Even we struggle sometimes.
It really isn't.
Beautiful. Now that I have an idea of how I want to do my podcast, I should probably think about how it's going to get to that wonderful target audience that we've identified. So, Bradley, distribution strategy. Where are we putting this podcast out? Is it audio? Is it video? Give it all to me.
So, I mean, podcasts at their basic are audio. That's a super important part of the DNA of what I think makes it into a podcast.
The birthing of podcasts was from just audio.
Yes, it very much was. And that's what a lot of people still associate with them.
For sure.
Most people nowadays are listening to podcasts on their music streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music being the big two, Amazon Music, Deezer, Tidal, etc., Google Podcast, which is now going onto YouTube. And to get your podcast onto those platforms, you have to go through a distributor of some description. And there's a variety of different distributors. You can Google it. We break down a whole bunch in the CAYA Guide to Podcasting, particularly ones that we've used in the past. There's Libsyn, there's Buzzsprout, there's Spotify for Podcasters, which is really nice, and particularly for people starting out is a great, great tool. One of the advantages of Spotify for podcasters being that it allows you to publish your podcast in video on Spotify, which a lot of the others don't do yet. But yeah, I think those distributors generate an RSS feed, which then syndicates it to all of those platforms. You sometimes need to set up a little profile for each of those platforms for their podcasting tools. But yeah, there's a variety of different options. They differ kind of in their data storage, in the analytics they give, that kind of thing. So go and have a look at what suits you best. They also all do make it pretty easy to port from one to the other because it's in all of their best interests. So you can always start with one distributor and then port your podcast to another.
Okay, wonderful. So those are mainly the audio platforms. You mentioned that Spotify now has the functionality for video. Yes. Nick, where else are we distributing video podcasts?
Yeah, so immediately it's Spotify and YouTube. They allow you to put up video. Is there any other ones? I don't think so.
Not really.
Yeah, Spotify, YouTube's your main. And yeah, video, it really just adds that extra sort of edge to the podcast. It broadens the audience. It broadens your audience. It also allows you to put it out on social media. So like Instagram, Spotify, and that really just helps with marketing as well.
Spotify, do you mean TikTok?
I mean TikTok. Sorry, Spotify.
We are mind readers.
That was so good.
Instagram and TikTok, and that's just really helps with marketing. It helps with getting your podcast out there and just growing your target audience.
Okay, so if I choose a video podcast, it's not only like visually appealing, watching the full episode, but what I'm hearing is it's great for marketing the podcast, which is actually something that I want to chat about, is marketing strategy. So what, aside from short form video marketing, what other ways could we use to market our podcast? Yeah,
so another one that I've seen that's quite successful is newsletters. This is when you basically people subscribe to your newsletter and you'll send out like weekly updates, just like letting them touching points on the podcast, letting them know that the podcast has been released. And then a quick summary of the podcast, all the important information. It's just weekly updates.
Okay, I could see that also working nicely for maybe an audio only podcast where you don't have that video capability.
Yes.
Brad, any others that maybe would work for an audio only podcast, which obviously work for video podcasts too, but
yeah. Another good way to market your podcast is by guesting on other people's podcasts or like guest blogging. I guess, but that feels a little bit less direct. I think guest podcasting is a hugely effective way. Again, if you can guest on someone's podcast where they share a content pillar with you and you talk about that fundamentally, you have one shared or a couple of shared interests that align with your podcast, that means at least some portion of that person's audience also are interested in that content pillar, and they may really enjoy your take or really enjoy the idea of you who handles those similar interests and has some other interests that they share, or your perspective is different. I think it's a great way of kind of giving people a little bit of a taste of what they can expect from your podcast without them having to make the commitment.
Okay, wonderful. Now we know where to put our podcast and how to market it. How often should we be putting out a podcast? What is the scope that people should be looking at and the pros and cons of choosing?
So again, and it's like while these things seem super down the line, like only after you've recorded, it's really important to be thinking about it from the very beginning. The cadence at which you put out your podcast or the regularity is really, really important, and understanding yourself and being very realistic about like the limitations on your time and capacity are really important, because consistency in podcasting is everything. You're fundamentally wanting to make people make you a part of their routine. So what you need to be practical with is like, if I can only realistically commit to putting out an episode once a month, that's fine. Put out an episode on the first Wednesday of every month or whatever, but like people can cognize that. Whereas if you say you're going to do it weekly and then you put out like every 2 weeks and then every 3 weeks and then it like take a month and then it's every week and then like people are like, whoa, dude. and then they can't trust you, so they don't see the value in the content you're providing.
I see.
So, yeah.
Okay. And no, Nick, I was just going to say, you edit our podcasts for CAYA. What are some of the unexpected challenges that one might run into that it will delay an output schedule? Like, I feel like there's millions, just so that maybe someone who thought putting out an episode a week would be manageable, but you got the expertise. You know that there's a lot of shit going on there.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is sort out your brand guide. So like, you want to know what your color palettes are, you want to know what your fonts are way before like you even start with the recording, really. But just so that isn't things that you are scrambling a week before you need to put out your podcast.
A week,
or
hours. Minutes.
Exactly. So yeah, that's just
Where's
like
the fucking thumbnail?
Where's the thumbnail?
Get that
what
template.
Colors?
Get that template for your thumbnail so you can just push it out. And then like that's really like the on top of the list. There's a lot more. There's
a lot more that could go wrong.
There's a lot more that could go wrong.
Okay, thank you. Hearing it from the podcast editing expert, there's a lot that you might not expect. So, yeah.
What can go wrong will go wrong.
Exactly.
I mean, technology just, likes to mess around with you. So,
yeah.
It's crazy shit out there.
Yeah.
Okay, and we know when our podcast is going out in fact, it's out. Oh, exciting. And now we want to market it, and we have our beautiful short form video content. Different platforms like different posting consistencies. So Brad, do you want to run us through maybe like TikTok and Instagram are the main two I can think of right now? How often should we be promoting our podcast?
Yeah. So again, and it's like, why are we talking about this? We're still in the pre-production phase technically. Understanding, how you plan to market it, how much marketing material you need, how am I going to stretch that over, the gap between each episode. All of those things are really important to understand before you start doing any of this, because it's going to inform your production decisions. It's going to inform your post-production decisions, etc., etc.
Ultimately, it's also going to save you a lot of time.
Yeah, for sure. And look, like these are also not things that like you set in stone and they're not never changeable. That's not the case, but like having the framework's important. TikTok for growth, ideally you want to be posting once a day. Often that's impractical. Instagram as well, in theory, once a day is kind of a good recipe for success. But again, I think consistency and giving people, if you're posting every 2 days and you're posting a reel and then it's a quote post and then it's a reel and that's every 2 days, I think that's fine, especially in the beginning. I think ultimately the truth of it is the more content you can create, the more regularly you can put out new things, the more eyes have a chance of seeing it. The more likely volume is always going to be your winner. So if you can do one a day, great. But yeah, I think Instagram, TikTok are both true for that. LinkedIn is a really cool place to promote your podcast, particularly if you're on the more like educational, information, thought leadership side of things. And there you don't want to post more than once a day. Like don't post more than once a day. LinkedIn doesn't like that at all. YouTube I think is pretty open-ended. TikTok again, I don't think there's a upper limit on how much you can post. And Twitter as well, or X as it is now known. I think there you can be using short little quotes and excerpts that you like from your podcast as a way to kind of A/B test what things resonate, and then cutting clips from that is a really good way of kind of mining your audience to understand what will resonate. And that you're posting more than once a day by volume.
Wonderful. Well, we have reached the last section of our conversation in terms of pre-production for podcasts, and that is guest preparation. Because if you've decided on having a guest to interview for your podcast, the last thing you want is for them to rock up unprepared. They don't end up feeling comfortable or giving quality information. So, Brad, in terms of the pre-guest arriving, the stuff you're gonna chatting over email, what kind of information do you think they need to know?
So, yeah, you're bang on. Like, again, setting up for a good recording happens way before the recording itself, and having your guests arrive prepared where they know what to expect makes a huge difference in terms of how I think particularly the beginning of your conversation goes. And so it's definitely in your best interest to make sure they're as prepared as possible, answer as many questions as you can before they ask them. You know, we've got kind of two ways we do that. One being having a release form of some description. There's a bunch of templates on the internet. But that's just basically your guest giving consent to being recorded, having their image or likeness used in marketing, that you can edit it to the degree that you will. You know, just basically dotting your I's and crossing your T's and making sure that they've approved, you know, whatever your approval process is going to be, that kind of thing. And then we also send through a guest prep brief, which just, and it differs from podcast to podcast and client to client, but, you know, ours includes a variety of different things in terms of a little bit of a description of what to expect from the podcast and podcasting and what podcasting is, you know, the recording environment, what it's going to be like, some microphone best practice so people don't get, you know, often people will arrive and they're like, oh my God, the microphone, it's right in my face, and then they put it here and then they're like, why does it not sound good in the end? It's like, well, because you did that. Anyways, pet peeve, which is why it's in every document. Things like how to handle if you fluff up or if you say something that's under NDA, etc. All of those things just help people to arrive knowing what to expect, and that makes a big difference. Doesn't mean you don't still have to tell them all of that before the recording as well.
Exactly. And that's something I was going to chat to you, Nick, about, because often you're the one sitting down our guest and explaining why this mic needs to be here. What are the things you kind of tell them to reassure them a smooth process in the recording environment?
Yeah, so we always just tell them speak directly into these microphones. These ones particularly, you need to be very directional. And
if you need a cough, do that.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Need a cough, don't scream into the mic. And then I think just like let them know we're not going to stop recording. Once everything's going, it's going. And if they do make a mistake or if they say something that they want to take out, like you said, it will be done in post. That happens in post-production. We don't stop the cameras. We don't say cut. We just keep going.
And they don't need to get like flustered. I mean, that's one of my favorite things is Nick, cut that out.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's because, again, it's like, I think the other thing that we often chat to people about is just like, yes, there's cameras, there's mics, all this lights and whatever. And all of that, you know, is only there to capture a good conversation. So like relax and focus on the conversation. The mics and the cameras will disappear, you know, focus on having an interesting conversation. The rest is kind of just there to capture that.
Yes.
Great.
Then I think always just keep a little spicy question for them at the end that you don't tell them about. Just to keep things interesting, you know?
Ooh, hot take from Nick. An end spicy question to keep things interesting. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys. That was such a lovely way to end, speaking about what really matters, and that's the conversation. And we'll get into that more next time with our production section of Behind the Mic, the podcaster's Playbook. Thank you for joining me today and sharing your expertise.
Thanks so much for hosting, Gina. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. No sweat at all, guys. Cheers.
Cheers,
See
guys.
you next time.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye.